the, I'm a Mayor's Design Advocate and Transport for London's Design Advisor. I tend to work in many areas, and what interests me is how we really truly can achieve a multi-generational master plan. It's very much from a point of view of placemaking, the neighbourhood as a whole, but right the way down to individual typologies. I'm just trying to access my slides. I'll be able to get control.
I think, Manisha, they can be advanced. Just if you ask for next slide, they can be advanced remotely.
Okay, next slide, please. So what makes up the challenge is what makes up a truly multi-generational neighbourhood, and the good principles that that we follow is that a multi-generational neighbourhood, a master plan, needs to take account of health and well-being, density, volumetric, topography, planning standards, air quality, ecology, biodiversity, heritage, orientation. And I could go on, but you can see by this diagram the complexity of what we look at and the layers and how they actually work together. Next slide, please. And this actually takes a lot of people who have skill sets. So in-house, we work with urban designers. Engagement, consultation is incredibly important. Architecture, how it's going to look. Climate adaptability, technology, research, always being ahead of the game, and how you change policy with the ideas that you have and you want to bring forward, and how does policy actually affect that. And marketing, publications, it's a really good way of getting a buy-in. Specialist housing, along with general needs housing and every other form in between, is quite important to be able to look at the multi-generational master planning. And also in dense areas, and next slide please, the landscape, public realm, and in dense areas, from dense areas to suburban areas to our rural areas. But it's about humans and human-centered design. And this is quite funny because the human-centered design is actually a thing, a design system and thought model used by product designers, web design developers and tech startups to design some of the most popular and sought after products and services we see today, including Spotify and Fitbit, countless payment and automated cloud thinking. But we know we don't always think of, as designers who are thinking in this way, don't always see as a product, but developers tend to, and changing the mindset in terms of turning what we want to really sell within the market place and get a buy-in. Sometimes you almost have to treat it as a product. Next slide, please. But we're doing a lot of work around what the crossover is and what housing means to different people through consultation and also through our many years of experience. And it's the priorities of young people, priorities of families, priorities of older adults. And there is such big crossover. People want to use cafes, they want to listen to music. People are still working. There is no working age that you stop, and that knowledge sharing has become incredibly important for the crossover between older generations and younger generations and meeting people. But our towns and cities also neighbourhoods need to consider schools, nurseries, infrastructure, and landscape, public realm, shops, facilities. Next slide, please. But there is a crossover in terms of all of these needs. And COVID has strengthened the need for multi-generational neighbourhoods from all ages. We've continued to engage with residents throughout the COVID process, and it's quite key that things are coming out which follow our principles in terms of integrated communities, the crossover between generations, the support mechanisms that are required, but still the ability to be independent up until you possibly can. And open spaces has become more and more important, that kind of idea of that breakout space and the location of services. Next slide, please. But what we're also, what's emerging in our towns and neighbourhoods is very much about the changing nature of retail and commercial and our facilities. There's the big viability question. And we've started looking at how meanwhile uses can start filling the gap of these, because there are, and how communities can actually get together and form sort of pop-ups and community spaces, and really try and have spaces and areas where you bring people together. And this is about movement, location of different typologies to facilities, which is key to master planning. Next slide, please. But when we're designing, the things that us designers are taking into account is planning standards, land value, big one, viability, remember that one, and that affects our developments and what we need in terms of school places, places of quality, retail, commercial, health, accessibility, and technology as it's moving on, and how can we afford to have the technology within the development, because the development has to pay for this. And so how does that become affordable? Affordability is also a big question in the world currently, especially in the UK. And affordability is not the same in the true sense, but affordability, a professional cannot afford to have their own home. So we do need to really create for that a choice of homes, and we truly believe this. Next slide, please. It's easy for us to think it's so complex because there are so many facets of this to bring together, and it would be good to see this in some form of standard that is implementable, so that there is guidance to follow. But that guidance has to be alongside all the other guidance that us as designers have to look at on a day-to-day basis. In the future, I would like to see standards that are already currently here, incorporating these standards, the ISO standards, and really truly challenging our entire industry. Next slide. Let's setting the standard. Next slide. We need to think about the location. We need to think about how the interconnected community. And the key ingredients for us is if it's a single building exclusively for older people, it's the location at the heart of the community, reasonable amenities, facilities, and that complement amenities that are in the surrounding area. And that area-wide research is quite important, so that you're not doubling up on things, so that you are making things viable. Next slide, please. And then there are models where we can already see that there are older generations mixed with younger generations within more higher density solutions. Next slide, please. And then there are multi-generational communities where people choose to live together. And that may be out of circumstance, need, or they may just have a choice that they would like to. But I think this affects all generations. And this is where I think the standard needs to be for the older generation as well as the younger generation. Next slide, please. At Chobham Manor, which was mentioned previously by Peter, we had the unique opportunity of master planning this site, which was of 850 units with communal floor space, new public realm, landscaping, principles that were all about integration, parks at open space at your doorstep, encouraging play and crossover between different generations, a community at the heart of it, and nurseries, and access to further education, sports facilities, and shops and retail, which were on your doorstep. It was mixed tenure, so affordable and private, which is quite key because we also had a mixture of typologies, 1, 2, 3 bedroom homes, as well as apartments, which were houses, which were part of the brief. But there was a missing ingredient. Next slide, please. We thought that there was a need for a new typology. At the time, affordability was very difficult. Extra care homes were becoming expensive. Nursery places were becoming expensive, taxes were going up, and there was also pensions were not doing so well. So the idea came from, I suppose, my cultural background, where families tend to support each other. And the idea was having a house with the annex, but it broke most of the planning laws, but still got planning. And it's amazing how you can actually challenge the norm. But the idea is that it's like a home for the cycle of life, that you are able to have your support, but with the connection of your family. And as time goes on, it can be used in different ways, with young adults being in the annex, for instance, and being able to save, to be able to get on with life, and the home is for the parents. The idea then, the parents may retire, need to top up their pensions, and want to still be accessible to facilities that they've been used to and still stay within their neighbourhood. They have the opportunity then to be able to rent out the other part of the house, but it becomes an incredibly flexible unit. This typology has worked, from feedback, very well during COVID, where generations have been able to support each other. And also the annex has been used for isolation. Next slide, please. And here is the model and the idea that we had, and the built one on the right-hand side. So it actually has happened. Next slide, please. But what we were told was there's no market. It costs too much. Next slide. What tenure can it be? Private versus affordable. Next slide, please. Cost versus developer benefits. Next slide. We thought that this would actually be an affordable home, but it never got taken up by the Housing Association. It was actually sold on the private market, and they sold like hotcakes. There was a need in the market, and once this came out, people actually felt, great, this is a good idea. We can club together our finance. Our elderly parents, our older generation really need the support, but actually us as a younger generation, we need support with childcare. So it worked quite well, and the developer, the director at the housing at Taylor Wimpey actually bought one because his mother-in-law was moving in with them. Next slide, please. And at Clapham, we have the opportunity to design 2,500, over 2,500 new residential units, and they're all with commercial floor space, beautiful new public realm, landscaping, community facilities, resource centre and energy centre, with a number of different accommodation. But at the heart of here was very much housing for an older generation, and shops and facilities at the ground floor. Next slide, please. And this actually made a really big difference, because it was the idea that we would, next slide please, that we would be able to create a master plan that could actually use all the facilities at ground level, feel as if you're in a neighbourhood, and it just becomes a natural part of movement around. And hopefully it will get built out. I think the first phase is underway, and we're able to really create these. So all of the ingredients are kind of here: the open space, the connections, the idea of having a mixed community and choice. But one of the things I would say is missing here is that kind of between a care facility to having general needs housing, is really that kind of multi-generational home. And multi-generational, the idea of being able to connect but also be separate. Next slide, please. So we feel that we need to enable choice, and typologies actually underpin the master plans and inclusive, and we need to encourage inclusive urban living, especially at a time where developers are looking at building more and more houses in the outskirts of cities, and we could be in danger that our cities are left with maybe one tenure, and we could be looking at our ghettos of the future because people choose to move out. And you can see that realistically with the change in home working. in the idea that people are spending less time in cities, and really you see the neighbourhood centres becoming more vibrant. So we need to really look at urban solutions as well as suburban solutions. We started thinking about how we could combine flats. And this is one idea because we felt that urban living should actually be encouraged, and that it should be the first choice when people want to be in that vibrant area, and it shouldn't be left to just young people being there. So we looked at, let's look at the basic model, 2 flats connecting it up together through a shared amenity, which is the balcony area. This simply is looking at the layout of each of the apartments, and you're able to have a young working family with the older generation supporting each other, connected, but still have their own separate front doors. That becomes really important, that you are able to connect when you want to and separate when you also choose to. The idea that a screen can actually be folded through so that in an affordable product, or even in a private home, you are able to sell these off separately, or you are able to combine them if you have a rental product, and you're able to then think about what family goes in there, so it could be allocated and separated. So that flexibility needs there from the beginning in terms of how we create our standards. Next slide, please. But our latest thinking, moving on for that, is the multi-generational flats. Now, this has really come out of an idea through COVID and the consultation and the discussions that we've been having with some residents that we are working on estate regeneration. There has always been a need within ethnically diverse communities, but actually it's not just that community, it's everyone, all communities. It doesn't matter which background you're from, have seemed to voice the need for this connection. So the idea again is that you have your independent entrances, and you're really looking at a 1-bed connected with a 2-bed. The idea that 2 generations can actually live together, but at the heart of that home is the kitchen, and you are able to connect through from each flat into the kitchen area. This does actually break the standards that the GLA currently put forward, but key to this is creating that open space. To make it attractive to the private market, the combined area is slightly smaller, but what we have done is looked at all of the standards currently and overlaid, and make sure that every single standard can work within that. The saving that you get is because you are saving on the kitchen and the dining area in terms of area, but it meets every other standard, and it's accessible and very much if a wheelchair user can use this. This is almost like a base template that we're starting to look at. Private developers have already started to think how they could pepper pot these within large regeneration schemes, as well as housing associations. So in my view, I very much think that it is about the bigger picture, but it has to be about the typologies that you are creating within those multi-generational master plans to enable choice in the market. Last slide, please. This just gives you an idea in terms of how it looks in 3D. Next slide, please. So I'm going to leave you with this. And Steve Jobs said it really well: create the market for the concept. People don't know what they want until you show it to them. And that was proven on the Olympic Park, where nobody really wanted to have a buy-in for the multi-generational house until it was actually built, with the fact that the LLDC, the London Development Corporation, really backed the idea. The developer took the risk, and it has become popular. Now we are designing them in Cambridge, as far out as Cornwall, and they have become integral to our master planning developments throughout the country. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manisha. As always, fascinating, very interesting to see those design typologies that you're working on. And I'm sure, as you say, we'll start to see those come to the market and hopefully delivered, some of them at least, by affordable housing providers like ourselves in the next few years. Our last speaker then in this section is David Orr.